I think of learning operations as that next evolution in the same way. Like, what kinds of assets are we producing? What's the cost around those assets? How fast are we going to market in relation to delivering it to clients? How are we measuring the success of said assets? How are we building them more efficiently? How are we maintaining them? And how is that tying into overall like KPIs that really drive business results? So there, I look at it in two facets. There are the learning KPIs for like, and the experience KPIs, like what is good learning? What did that look like? Was it meaningful and impactful to the learner? And then it's tying that to business KPIs and results. Are there efficiency gains, cost savings, KPIs that matter to the business? And in a sales context, that's usually an easier one to attach, but there's always a lot of work in connecting those dots.
Welcome to the LearnOps Leadership Series. I'm really excited today to introduce Kason Morris, who's the head of learning experience design at Salesforce. Kason, you've been a part of numerous L&D jobs, I think across five industries. From just my own background and research, and from previous conversations, you focused a lot on skill development. You're currently focused on long-term skill development for salespeople across Salesforce. You've really helped people with career development, coaching, lifestyle design. Welcome to the show, Kason.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. These are all great, relevant topics to talk about in today's world of work, and learning is truly competitive advantage in the workplace. And I love talking about these topics and sharing ideas around what I'm doing, and hopefully it could be helpful to others.
Yeah, and I agree about your comment about learning being a competitive advantage. Just from working with a lot of learning and development teams ourselves, there's been a huge change in shift on how learning is being perceived by businesses or through the enterprise since COVID and the pandemic. I mean, I think a lot of people have woken up even more so than in the past, to see learning being a strategic arm to the business growth versus, historically, sometimes some leaders would look at learning being more of a service line. And we've seen a huge change in this. I mean, what have you seen out of curiosity?
I think you're spot on. It's the mindset of leaders, to your point around learning being a service line or a cost center type of logic, where it's something that we need to do. Moving from this idea of that it's actually a strategic function and capability that can help with a number of different areas, not only creating efficiencies and productivity gains with employees, but then also as like a retention tool, and also an attraction strategy for recruitment. Because when you think about the future of learning and the future of work and what employees are looking for in these upcoming generations, millennial generations, Generation Z, they want to be at places where they feel like they can grow their careers and they can build skills. And companies that are differentiating with their ability to upskill and right skill, they tend to thrive more.
Companies who are forward thinking, not just thinking about today, but looking at the 3 to 5 year outlook. What competencies, what skills do they need? How can we skill up people, move them to new exciting positions, stay relevant? I mean, so it's apparent where learning and development needs to align to that, and why L&D is this strategic, being looked at through a strategic lens as we move forward in today's world too. You know, um, I think you're managing, and correct me if I'm wrong, 50 or more learning consultants, and you have a really important mission, within your focus. You're helping to build skills for 20,000 plus salespeople across Salesforce. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's a very privileged and interesting position where our team within the organization is a team of about 100 or so folks, and they're all focused on solving problems around learning and learning experience, and how impacting learning experience and up-leveling learning experience is really a driving value for the organization as a whole, driving overall value for the whole global enablement function. And the way I think about it, just as a thought leader, it's it's really taking this idea of learning experience design, which is the intersection of a bunch of different disciplines around learning, instructor led, virtual, e learning, what technologies we're using, but really centered around the actual learner. So having that sort of human centric point of view around what do people need at point of need to do their best work, and how are we designing for those elements. So it's a great privilege to be in this position to help with that thought leadership and to have the support of a great organization that is invested in its people to do so.
Yeah, I mean that's really motivating job, and I want to dig into some of the comments on learning experience design that you talked about. Before doing that, let me backtrack. One of the most fun parts of the interview series that I like to do is just learn how people even got into L&D. I fell into it myself.
Mhm.
What's your story? How did you end up, being a thought leader in learning experience design and leading that for Salesforce?
I would say very similarly, it's a happy accident. Out of graduate school, I had a degree in marketing and business, and one of my first jobs out of school was at a marketing job. And as part of that job, we were marketing to high-end luxury brands, and in order to execute the work, one of the things that I really dialed in on was the power of people and the power of people in the workplace to collaborate to make great outcomes happen for clients. So that really got me curious about people management and learning at work, and how all these different folks within the team had to learn and deliver on different skills in order to achieve that outcome. So that got me curious, and then that led me to grad school, where I did a dual degree in an MBA program in human development, and that degree was a springboard into the world of learning consulting. Started in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then just started crafting and redesigning my learning career from that point in various capacities, as you intro through 5 different industries, starting in DEIB, leading to management consulting, leading into financial services, then into professional services, and now into SaaS, where I've been building learning and development capabilities for the past 6 years.
Given that you've gone through transitions and have led different learning and development initiatives in multiple industries, in your opinion, what are some of the biggest changes that you're noticing within the industry over the last few years?
I would say the industry overall is I think technology has had a huge influence. What you were able to do in relation to delivering high quality learning experiences back when I started compared to where it is now, it's night and day. So it's really the influence of how technology can help empower quality learning. Now it's not technology in of itself, but when you think about to the point that you made earlier, moving learning into more of a business capacity, is thinking about the ideas of learning operations and how that all works. So thinking about technology operations, and then what are the specialty skills in running a learning organization and running learning like a business within the context of a corporate structure. Really, really interesting, really innovative. I correlated to the growth of marketing at work. When you think about how huge marketing functions are as a part of business, and how many different types of role specialties there are, I see learning going in that similar direction, where you need to borrow from other disciplines, from data science, from communication, from instructional design, from graphic design, from change management. It's a growing interdisciplinary space that is borrowing from all these other areas, and that's how it's setting itself up as a competitive differentiator for those companies that really invest in it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also product management is a skill
Yeah,
set, right?
100%.
I mean, I would agree if you could combine product management methodology with also how marketing teams function. In marketing, you have return of ad spend.
Hmm.
Up until I don't know, maybe 7 years ago, before like HubSpot and some of these other SaaS platforms really showed the industry how you can measure return of ad spend or show the impact of your marketing dollars get to work. Marketing was looked at as a cost center, right? And then it flipped, and they started being able to show the business impact that marketing has to revenue functions, and the whole world changed, right? CFOs
Yeah.
opened up their eyes. CEOs said, "Let's spend more money on marketing." But and so I think there's a lot of lessons to learn from some of these functions that went through these transformations. IT
Yeah.
engineering teams splitting off of IT, going from waterfall to agile, product management teams going through product management processes that are very similar to learning experience design processes,
Yeah.
to how marketing teams, try and point back to their operational context in their work to showing the impact that their work had on the business, when you often don't see it right away. It takes months to actually see that, right? So I
Yeah.
think that's really important what you said, and a lot of lessons to learn from that as well. In
No.
your opinion, you know, where do you see the role of operations, for L&D departments, playing in supporting business strategy and performance? Maybe you can walk us through some of your methodology with learning experience design on, how do you partner with people to make sure that you're designing the right solutions to solve performance challenges or competencies or skill developments? How do you think through that? Is there a methodology? Is there a process that you follow? Like, what works best for you?
Yeah, I think you've alluded to a few. When I think of experience design, I think of it as interdisciplinary, but the core of it is really thinking about the learner experience and the outcomes that you want to achieve, and then backing into the right modality that you need to deliver and design that experience. So when you think about design. So to your point about around borrowing from like project management principles and using agile approaches, that's definitely a method that we deploy in learning experience design from the way that I help drive it and support it within my current organization, but then also beyond that. And it's really thinking about like what are the concepts that you want to drive forward at point of need, even borrowing from newer edge disciplines from a design perspective, where you think about the cluster and not so much just the learning as an event, but what are the things and the assets that are needed to support behavior change. So to the point that you made even earlier around how marketing started to prove their value, that's the direction I believe that learning is going in, is moving from just pure consumption to seeing, hey, where's comprehension going? How is this impacting behavior change, and how is that behavior change impacting the bottom line? So to tie together the answer, when you think about operations in that regard, and borrowing from different disciplines, and I think about like sales operations as the best example. Any big sales organization worth its salt has an operations function, and an operations function is that cross functional intermediary that connects the dots between the account sellers on the ground, the account executives who are pushing the numbers, the folks in business development and solutions engineering who are pulling together the solutions to drive that value. So I think of learning operations as that next evolution, in the same way to the points that you mentioned earlier, like what kinds of assets are we producing? What's the cost around those assets? How fast are we going to market in relation to delivering it to clients? How are we measuring the success of said assets? How are we building them more efficiently? How are we maintaining them? And how is that tying into overall like KPIs that really drive business results? So there, I look at it in two facets. There are the learning KPIs for like, and the experience KPIs, like what is good learning? What did that look like? Was it meaningful and impactful to the learner? And then it's tying that to business KPIs and results. Are there efficiency gains, cost savings, KPIs that matter to the business? And in a sales context, that's usually an easier one to attach, but there's always a lot of work in connecting those dots.
I think also being agile, where not every project is run by a particular process. Maybe a certain type of project needs to run through like SAM, um,
Hmm.
or an agile process. But for content updating projects, maybe you have a different process to standardize with your team for that, or
Yep.
and then learning the basics from a data perspective so that you can make look at data in a little bit of a way to make some decisions and know when to pivot or iterate and whatnot too. You said something really important around like the impact. Are you deploying any evaluation methods? Like how are you looking at, was this learning experience successful? What impact did it have? Is there anything that you're doing to help measure that?
Yeah, there's always a space to experiment with measure, and to your point around aligning with proper data and analytics that connect the dots. When you think about like Kirkpatrick models and different types of evaluation methods, most folks are do that sort of point of need evaluation, like meaning like I call it the smile sheet, where it's like, hey, did you enjoy this? Do you have any recommendations? I would say the next level evaluation beyond the experience, and this moves away from the idea of treating training and learning like an event and more so like a continuum, is there are now technologies out there and technologies where you can measure and check on people using machine learning and AI and other types of influences to really understand how people remember that information, at a time beyond the event. And the value in that insight is that you can then start to become really prescriptive on two measures that I think about is really the comprehension, like did I get it? Do I understand it? But then also the confidence level, and if they're feeling really confident or they're not so confident. And so I try to look at those kinds of measures to help sort of understand what kind of behavior changes are needed or what kind of additional enablement is needed to support that particular learning event, whether it's coaching, whether it's another type of session to drive home and reinforce those key ideas. But the big point that you made that I want to emphasize in that is when you make those kinds of decisions driven by data and insight, it's usually far more impactful for the business, but then also for the individual versus making an assumption that they either get content or they don't get the content.
And a point to emphasize that you made earlier is about being outcomes focused
Mm-hmm.
and working backwards. So even taking the time, it's as simple as sitting down with your team and just saying, what is the outcome of what we're trying to achieve with this learning experience or this learning solution? You know, how are we trying to help? What outcome do we need to change? And what is the ideal behavior outcome from that? And then you can measure against that because you're so laser focused on what you're trying to accomplish and everybody's aligned that it becomes easier, not harder. Um, so I love when people talk about outcomes first because it's not just learning and development; it's just business practice in general. To be more precise as well. So speaking about all of this, what are some of the challenges? We're seeing some crazy stuff, Kason, from different companies right now. There's this healthcare company that we know of that just, literally got consumed into operations. And like the leader of all of it is a senior vice president of operations, no L&D background, right? And to me, that's an kind of an important message, which is almost like we need to better operationalize this because it is strategic and we want to measure it, and maybe they're not doing it the right way and they need help with operations, right? And I might be wrong, I could be making an assumption, I try not to make assumptions, but we're seeing things like this across the industry right now, and I think it's really important time for L&D professionals to better understand how to operationalize so that they can show the impact, similar to that, analogy with marketing and ad spend from back in the day, so that they can lead, and they will and are the best people to lead that division, since they are learning professionals, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
where do you think the challenges are? Like, why is this happening right
I think it's if I could boil it down to something, I think it's mindset. So it's everything is evolving. So what I mean by mindset, and I'll even add the word culture to it. So in growing up from the cost center into this logic of being the operation center, the business strategy arm, legacy folks in the learning design space, I don't think they have the muscles as strong on the operations side. So the fact that there are folks who have stronger muscles in those areas starting to take stake toward thinking about how do we turn learning into an element that supports and has the right infrastructure to be business driven is really important. But it's like two sides of that coin. So I'd say it's having examples in more traditional business operations, and then having those learning leaders and the folks that can drive and understand the learning also up level and reskill themselves to have that business mindset and borrow from those disciplines and apply it in the proper context for high quality learning experience and learning operations. So I think there's a journey ahead. I think there's a skill window that is there for L&D as a function and as a capability, where it's that growing up in the org capability space and how to attach learning to key business metrics and how to operationalize learning in a way that keeps the seat at the table and grows that seat and that influence at the business operations table for most businesses.
now? Let's dig into that a bit. I mean, in your opinion, there's two things, so maybe we'll break it apart. You talked about business metrics.
Mhm.
For people trying to figure this out, what type of business metrics do you think L&D should investigate into to see if their learning inventions are supporting improvement? Um, and people who are trying to figure out, like, it's a battle. Any transformation is a battle, right? So
Mhm.
you need to address this head on, to build that business case, to show that you can operationalize this function, treat it like a business, and drive that impact. Um, for people who are trying to figure out, like, am I the best for that? I mean, one of your other expert areas is lifestyle design, right? So, the industry is going through a transition. I'd love to, break it into two parts, talking about the business metrics. And then after that, maybe we can jump into how should people be looking at lifestyle design going through this transition to balance this, because it's not easy, right?
Yeah, yeah. No, no, it's a great question. It's a very meaty, hot topic. To answer the first part, like the way I look at it is when you think about more traditional learning and training metrics, you think about intake, you think about participation rates, you think about completion rates, you think about pass rates. Those are the things that most folks think about from an L&D perspective, which is, I won't say it's traditional, but it's very centered around the event. And this is where I speak to it a little bit differently, where I'm like thinking about the journey of behavior change. So moving beyond just those measures still count, but it's like, how are you connecting it to things like ongoing skill assessment? And that was my point around comprehension and confidence level. And then it's like, how do you tie it to business goals? How do you tie these metrics to business goals? So what I mean by business goals is it could be, in a sales context, account sold or time to ramp. Like if people are learning faster and therefore getting their first deals faster, there's a correlation to their knowledge consumption and yielding that result. You could even broaden the spectrum when you think about the world that we're in now with the great resignation or great reprioritization and the wars for talent. to the point that I led in with in this conversation, when you think about using learning as a talent attraction tool and a talent retention tool, these are now metrics that have hard numbers in relation to how many people stay in the org, how many people get promoted throughout the org. That you could look at the cost in relation to keeping employees versus having to hire new employees. And so when you look at all those variables, and in relation to the investment of skills and the investment in teaching folks and upskilling versus trying to find that exact talent that you need in the marketplace, it becomes a numbers conversation. And if you can start to reduce, you know, the cost of acquisition for top talent, the cost for retaining top talent, and up level the productivity of talent that you have, these all speak the language of the business, of the C-suite, of operations, of finance, and these are the kinds of conversations that L&D as a whole, operation strategy enablement, need to be having.
Yeah, I mean that. I think that's very insightful for some of the companies who still need to educate to show that. Um, how do they start those conversations? How can they show that they're starting to align to the corporate strategy, for example?
I think it's about the learning leaders getting curious about how are they solving pain points beyond
Hmm.
the learning event. So it's starting with business units and building those partnerships and understanding where some of those challenges and how learning and operations and enablement can help support in solving some of those pain points. And that's why I alluded to like using the language of the business. And when you start talking about cost savings and attrition rates and retention rates, these are the kinds of KPIs that different business leaders will look at. So know the language of your target customers, the
Hmm.
leaders, and then start to think about how the way you're thinking about learning or what the work that you're doing in learning translates into that. And if there are gaps, then that tells you that there's probably a growth and a maturity space that needs to happen between where the company is and where it needs to be in order for it to be better positioned, in order for learning to be better positioned. And as an expert, you can start to champion those conversations and connect those dots for those leaders. And when you start speaking their language, they'll give you the space and grace to start to experiment, and you experiment in different ways that you can add value. So I'm a big believer in this kind of work. Ask for forgiveness, not permission. If unless you have the permission there, then great. Because some companies that are leading edge, they want people to experiment. Others who may be a little bit behind in that mindset, you may have to try stuff and bring those conversations to the table. So that ties into what the other part of the question that I didn't get a chance to jump in on, which is like the designing piece. So a big part of my work now, even beyond my executive leader role in learning, is how are individuals from a career perspective taking agency in the things that they like to do, the things that add value to the business, and start when you start looking at it from more of a strategic perspective, you can start to craft your jobs and see where there are opportunities within the business. So if L&D doesn't have this function or have this capability, but there's a business case for it because you got curious and you had those conversations with the leaders and you could show how it can result in cost benefits or efficiency gains, that may open the door for you to learn, gain new knowledge, whether it's a degree, whether it's a certification, and then to try and experiment with those things. And that gets into that whole idea of career crafting and job crafting, which I'm a big believer in, and it's what I've used in my 15-year career in this space. Before I knew it was called that, it's just the idea of anticipating what's happening in the market and thinking about what's bleeding edge, what technologies are influencing that, and then thinking about what are the things that solve problems for the companies that you're working for, and how can you be the first to tell those kinds of stories and be the first to try stuff, because that's what will set you apart.
To your point, asking the questions to learn the business, like there's just value on its own to not just look at the job duties of why you are hired, and to be more strategic, to be more curious, to go to the C level or to the CFO or whatnot and say like, hey, I would like to learn about our strategy this year, next year, the following year, understand what skills we might need to develop, and then go and talk to your business partners who you might be supporting and ask them the same year. It's like, where do you, what's the goal for you this year? What's the goal
Yeah.
next year, the following year? So that you can use that to map and get as insights into where the gaps from skill development or competency development is. And then also learn how to map initiatives and to prioritize, right? Like if you are partnered with the sales organization and it is mission critical to get to a certain target and we're behind or whatnot, providing material that's going to help get the sales leader to that goal. Not only are they going to be grateful to that, but they're going to go and talk about how learning helped the organization get there,
Yeah.
right? And
Uh-huh.
so
100%.
linking back to those things is really important, from a project perspective. Even looking at your project when you're using whatever tool you're using to manage those projects, just tying back the project to like, what skills do this develop? Does this project help to develop? Do those skills tie to our corporate objectives or to my partnership objectives, so that you have some sort of dashboard at the end of the day?
Yeah, and you make a great point. It's not always about it being a perfect fit. It's the mindset of thinking that way. That's
Mm-hmm.
what will help support it. Even more simplistically, it's like, what's the one thing a leader could do? It's understand what's keeping the business up at night. The leaders in the business, like, what's keeping you up at night, and because they may not know they have the problem, but the goal I recommend, and when I coach others and other leaders as well, it's like, you want to become a trusted partner. This borrows from sales logic. It's like, you want to be a trusted partner, being able to provide value and insight. Sometimes that may translate into some kind of learning event or learning experience, but it's less about that. It's more about being able to listen and use certain skill sets that show that you're paying attention, that you care about the bigger goals, and then translating that in the context that's meaningful for the business. And then you can apply that also at an individual level, team based level, when you think about being a leader, as on a personal level, as you're managing up and trying to find opportunities. You can take those very same principles, to your direct manager. Hey, what's keeping you up at night? If you're in the hierarchy of the learning design organization, hey, what are the things that the leads are thinking about? How can I potentially help and solution? Where can I find opportunities to bring in efficiency gains or new ideas? And serves two purposes. One, it shows your value and it keeps you top of mind within those leaders' mindsets. Two, you can make recommendations toward things that are interesting to you versus just reacting to what's given to you, from a career and a job perspective. And I find when people make that shift, they're a lot happier at work, and with their careers, because it's not about it being perfect, but it's about feeling like you have a voice, and you can create opportunities, with the right attitude.
Again, the industry is definitely going through transformation. A lot of focus on operationalizing L&D right now. Being a coach, in addition to head of learning experience design at Salesforce, but being a coach and just helping to coach on lifestyle design, like, what tips do you have for people to go through this transformation? What are some things they should be thinking about for themselves to make sure they're
Mhm.
investing their time in the right areas that will help them be happy?
Yeah. If I could leave some like quick takeaways, is I think it's start from where you are. What a lot of people do is they set goals for themselves without really having a vision. Um, and the exercise of crafting your own vision can be really, really helpful, because it'll give you perspective on the types of things that you want to do more of, the types of things that you want to do less of, and then that will help direct, the career choices you make, the role opportunities you start to take on, things along those lines. So I'd say that's one of the big first steps. And given the world that we're in, to the point of this conversation initially, is change is the only constant. So it's like when you think about what skills you need to work on next, it's like what are the skills that are the most durable for you, that you have the most interest in. And these are the kinds of skills that will pay you back forever. Some of those skills have a technology lens to them. A lot of the skills, when I think about like sort of future proofing yourself, are skills that are very human centric. It's about how you interact with other humans and how you use technology to help get that result. So I would, just to kind of wrap up the thought, I would say start from where you are and audit yourself to inform your perspective, and then focus on skills that have more durability in the ideas that you of the things that you want to do next, because there are skills that are high value but are perishable, which means they may not last that long. So when I coach folks, I always tell them to kind of look at the landscape and try to index for skills that have the longest shelf life, so that they serve them the most going forward.
Are there any skill areas that you're seeing from an L&D perspective that like what are top three skill development areas that you see for L&D teams right now?
I'd say it's hard to nail it down specifically, but I think just having uh, both a creative and an analytical mindset can be very, very helpful toward experience design. Focusing on that human centricity element, like understanding to learn how to learn, like a little neuroscience will definitely help. So having those insights and from an L&D perspective can be really helpful. And then I would say, just in thinking about technologies, it's really choosing the right technologies. Um, so it's there's a proliferation of technology in our landscape, and it's just understanding a little bit more about how technology impacts the work. It's not about being a master of every single technology in the space, but based on what you want to do and what you want to get deeper in, align and understand that technology landscape, and that'll serve you because you'll be able to have mature conversations about it, especially if it's in a leading edge or innovative space that your organization may not have a lot of knowledge or insight about.
Well said. Well, this conversation, Kason, has been extremely valuable. I've learned a lot myself just, partnering with you on this and hearing your perspective and your thought leadership. I really appreciate your time today. I'm excited to get this posted for the community, and hopefully it really helped the audience um, better learn some new skills, how to operationalize L&D, and even just look at their own lifestyle by design on where they want to go with their careers during this learning transformation. So thank you so much, Kason.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. I really love the fact that you've had me for this conversation, and I love talking about these topics. So thank you.
Thanks for watching the LearnOps Leadership Series. For more episodes like this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And visit us at Cognota.com. That's COGNOTA.com.